hey. When I say hey, you say ho, hey.
Ho.
Hey.
Ho.
When I say maboo, you say hi, maboo.
Hi.
Maboo.
Hi.
When I say maboo, you say hey, maboo.
Hey.
Maboo.
Hey.
All right. Nerves under control. Before I begin, I want to pay tribute to the Lenape people whose land we stand on today. We are merely inhabitants of this land that was stolen from them, and for them we ask humbly for permission to occupy this space. Dear Dean Aquino, distinguished faculty, staff, family, friends, guests, and the graduating class of 2019. Like many Asian Americans and people of color, my story begins way before I was born. My grandparents were born in the early 1900s, years after the Philippine-American War, which put an end to almost 4 centuries of Spanish colonization. My parents both grew up in rural Philippines right before the outbreak of World War II. As children, they hid from Japanese soldiers in caves and in the mountains, and they saw or heard their townspeople getting killed or tortured. My mother first came to the US in 1962 at a time when there was an annual quota of 100 immigrants from the Philippines, an increase of a previous annual quota of 50 people from most Asian countries, but well below Germany's annual quota of 57,000 people. My mother worked as a nurse at Cook County Hospital in Chicago for 3 years, and she returned to the Philippines when her work visa expired. There she met my father, and when they first started dating, she said that if he wanted to marry her, that he would have to immigrate to the United States, something that he had not planned to do. But because my mom was the Beyonce of her generation, when my parents first immigrated to California in 1969, all they brought with them were 2 suitcases, their Philippine college educations, and their dreams. They left everything they had and everyone they knew with the hopes of providing a better life for their hypothetical children. That is the ultimate sacrifice, to give up everything you ever knew for the slight chance that your children, who did not even exist, could have a better life than you had. My parents' story is one that I imagine is similar for many people in the audience, but my story as a child of immigrants is one that I imagine is similar for many others in the audience. As the child of immigrants, I grew up hearing stories about what life was like in the motherland and how I should always be grateful for everything that I had. I learned not to take things for granted and to not be wasteful. It is the reason why I wash and reuse Ziploc bags multiple times, and why I pour and shake water into tomato sauce jars to make sure that every last drop is used. While I was embarrassed that we did not have some of the things that other kids had, like a Super Nintendo or cable TV, my parents provided me with everything I needed. Unconditional love, the knowledge that you can only succeed with hard work and perseverance, and the Filipino guilt that made me work 10 times harder than everyone else to make them proud of me. As an Asian American and as a Filipino American, I learned to navigate the world of microaggressions and implicit bias from a very early age. Everything from the age-old questions of, where are you from? New York. Where are you really from? I don't want to give you my address. To a stranger first meeting me and saying, hey, my nanny was Filipino, and me replying with, cool, I'll say hi to her at the next meeting. As a queer Filipino and a queer person of color, I learned to navigate all sorts of spaces, from the homophobia within Filipino and Asian American communities, the racism within LGBTQ communities, and the multiple and intersectional oppression in general society. I learned early on that I really did have to work 10 times harder than everyone else, because you know that if you're a person of color, or a woman, or a queer or transgender person, or a person with disability, your work is going to be judged and evaluated with a more critical eye than your white heterosexual cisgender counterparts. By the time I was 18, I had heard so many negative and debilitating messages that picked at my self-esteem and my soul. From the police officers or my high school counselors and teachers who labeled me as a troublemaker, to the peers who bullied me for being gay. From the constant bombarding of media images of white people with blonde hair and blue eyes as the standard of beauty, to the lack of brown or black people in leadership positions in government or in school systems. Though I had good grades in general, I never thought I was destined for greatness. In fact, my greatest goal was to graduate from college, only because that was what was expected of me. When I first was accepted into the University of California, Irvine for my undergraduate degree, I spent most of my time in activist and ethnic student organizations within our multicultural center. We fought for ethnic studies and Tagalog classes and more resources for students of color. We protested the passing of Proposition 209, which put an end to affirmative action in California public universities. We built coalitions with Black Student Union and MECHA, and we demanded meetings with our chancellor to have our voices heard. As Filipino American students, we fought for visibility within our Asian American communities, recognizing that Filipinos had a long and unique history of oppression in the United States, that we were often viewed as not being Asian enough, and that we were not being treated equitably by both the umbrella Asian American community and the university. We were fighting so hard and for so many things that I almost forgot I was a student. And as a student, I never even imagined that I could ever become a professor. Likely because I never had a Filipino American professor, and I had hardly any professors of color in general. That changed my junior year when a Latina professor, Dr. Janet Castellanos, asked me if I was planning on going to graduate school. I literally replied to her with, "What's graduate school?" How would I know what graduate school was if I never knew anyone that went? Well, I had heard about medical school and law school because I am Asian. I had never known anyone with a PhD. The first professors I ever met were the ones that I met on the first day of my classes in college. This is why my friend Dr. Sylvia Misula and I later started the hashtag "This is what a professor looks like" campaign. Because you can't be what you don't see. We need to change the images of what a professor looks like, what a scientist looks like, what an engineer looks like, what an artist looks like, and even what a president looks like. And because I never had a Filipino American professor, I was motivated to become one. When I graduated from Teachers College, Columbia University, I became the first person in my family to ever attain a PhD. In fact, a common theme throughout most of my life is that it always seems that I am a first. The first and only person in my family to graduate from an Ivy League institution, the first and only person in my family to ever become a tenured professor, the first and only person in my family to ever write a book, the first person of color, and the first and only Asian American to become the executive director of the Center for LGBTQ Studies in its 25-year history, the first and only openly gay president of the Asian American Psychological Association in its 50-year history, and finally the first and only man of color to become a full professor in my department in its 50 years of existence. I share these facts with you not to boast and not to make my mom post on Facebook, but rather to recognize that this is a problem. In 2019, the fact that there are still so many firsts and onlys in many fields and across many sectors means that there are still so many systemic and institutional barriers for people of color and women and queer and trans people and people with disabilities. So if you are a first, we celebrate you, and I implore you to do whatever you can to pave the way for the seconds and the thirds and the fourths. To you, the class of 2019, I offer you some unsolicited advice that graduation speakers are almost always required to give. I learned somewhere that you should never make more than 3 points at a time, so I offer you 3 fundamental truths at the exact same time.
Wow.
Number 1, always remember where you came from and honor the people who paved the paths for you to get to where you are. It is through my parents' and grandparents' sacrifice and diligence that I'm even able to stand before you today. It is because of people like Larry de Leon and Philip Vera Cruz, Fred and Dorothy Cordova, and Dr. Don Boholano Babalam that Filipino Americans have a voice in this country today. It is because of people like Sylvia Rivera and Marsha P. Johnson and James Baldwin that I am able to stand truthfully and authentically as my queer brown self. Some of these legends sacrificed their entire lives, and most did not live to see the fruits of their labor. And it reminds me of something that my dear friend, Dr. Alicia Del Prado, used to tell me about what her Lolo, her grandfather, would ask her every time he saw her. And that was, "How is the harvest?" And what he meant by that was this, that the first generation comes to the US and plants the seeds. The second generation, they water the seeds and watch them grow. And the third generation, we are the harvest. So be the harvest. Make sure that your crop is healthy and plentiful. Maintain your crop for generations to come. And thank those generations of gardeners who gave you the ability to thrive. Number 2, find your voice as an Asian American. Contrary to popular belief, this country was not built for us. This university was not built for us. With its roots in slavery and genocide, it could never be the land of the free. Our parents, grandparents, and great-grandparents came to this country in search of the American dream, yet they were met with discrimination and racist legislation and stereotypes that they never knew existed. Many of them learned to succeed by assimilating, and many taught us to be grateful or to not make any waves. Many of them taught us to speak our native languages only behind closed doors, if they taught us our native languages at all. While I understand that they did this to protect us, I hope that your generation changes this mindset. Whether or not you were born here, whether or not you have the legal documents to prove it, you are American. Speak your family's native tongues wherever you like. Be loud AF. Say what's on your mind. Let's change that stereotype of the submissive Asian into a new stereotype of a loud Asian American activist. But please, let's do all of this while maintaining true to yourself and to your values. There's a way to be outspoken and respectful and effective at the same time. There's a way to know your self-worth without being entitled. Have the confidence of a straight white man and the humility of an Asian grandma. Number 3, whenever you have the choice between doing what is comfortable and fighting for justice, please always choose justice. We are not a model minority who believes in complacency. Our individual ethnic groups have fought against colonization and tyranny and oppressions in our countries of origin. Our collectivist Asian American communities have fought for our rights to own property, to run businesses. We staged hunger strikes for ethnic studies. We've marched and advocated for immigration rights, LGBTQ rights, women's rights, and equity for all. But within our own Asian American communities, we need to acknowledge and address the many issues that plague us, from anti-Blackness, to colorism, to patriarchy and toxic masculinity, to queer and transphobia, to xenophobia and colonial mentality. We need to robustly reevaluate our community dynamics and tackle the toxicity that hurts us. When we scream for AAPI representation, we need to scream for all AAPI representation. We must challenge any time we say something is Asian and it really means East Asian. And we must actively remember that brown Asians exist, and that South Asians, Southeast Asians, and Filipino Americans make up 50% of the Asian American population. We also need to acknowledge our privileges, our proximity to whiteness, the ways that we have benefited from and been hurt by white supremacy. We need to have these uncomfortable conversations at dinner tables. We need to talk about everything about why Black Lives Matter and why we should support affirmative action, to how we need to better destigmatize mental health. When microaggressions occur, we need to stand up as allies and accomplices in the same way that we hope our own allies and accomplices stand up for us. We need to be just as bothered and angry and saddened about the murder of Vincent Chin as we are about the murders of Joseph Ileto and Srinivas Kuchibhotla and the victims of the Sikh temple in Oak Creek, Wisconsin, and the mosque in New Zealand, as we are about the murders of Trayvon Martin and Eric Garner and Sandra Bland, and the victims of Mother Emanuel Church and Orlando's Pulse nightclub. Sometimes these conversations are not comfortable, and sometimes these conversations will have ramifications. But if not you, then who? It was not comfortable for our parents and grandparents to come to this country to give you a better life. It was not comfortable for the revolutionaries who fought against colonization in India, Vietnam, Korea, and the Philippines, against communism in China, against tyranny in Laos, Cambodia, and Japan, and for independence in Pakistan and Bangladesh. It was not comfortable for the Filipino and Chicano farm workers who went on strike to give us better working conditions. The Black activists who sat at kitchen counters and marched on the streets to end segregation, or even the white American founding fathers of this country who fought for freedom against the British Empire. Justice is never comfortable, and it never comes until people fight for it. I hope you continue to fight for it. At the end of the day, I hope you all realize that we are all just ordinary people who have the power to do extraordinary things. It reminds me of our fellow alum, President Barack Obama, who once roamed these very blocks as an ordinary undergraduate student here at Columbia. When he was elected, campus archivists and historians discovered that he wasn't really involved in many student activities and that he didn't leave much of a footprint on campus. In this way, perhaps President Obama was just an ordinary person, an ordinary undergraduate student who did not discover his power until after he graduated college. And so maybe that is the task at hand. The immediate task for you after you graduate. Find your power. And with that, you can do extraordinary things. And who knows, perhaps sitting among us is a future president of the United States. And you know what? I'm sure she is. Thank you very much.